a call for peace. Ending the conflict in Ukraine. The world watches with bated breath. The war in Ukraine is a tragedy that has left deep scars on the nation. It is a humanitarian crisis of immense proportions, affecting millions of innocent lives. The United States must work for peace, not more war. Our actions should reflect our values. Sending weapons to Ukraine is not the answer. It only fuels the fire of conflict. We need a ceasefire now, more than ever before. The US should stop sending arms to Ukraine immediately. This policy is wrong. It prolongs the conflict and increases suffering. It leads to more death and destruction, tearing families apart and devastating communities. It makes peace more difficult to achieve, creating deeper divisions and mistrust. We need a new approach, one that prioritizes dialogue and understanding. Diplomacy is the only way to end this war. It is the path to a sustainable solution. We must urge both sides to come to the negotiating table to find common ground. We must demand a ceasefire, a halt to the violence and bloodshed. We must work for a just and lasting peace where communities can rebuild and thrive. The people of Ukraine have suffered enough. Their resilience is remarkable, but they need peace. The world has suffered enough. The global community must come together. It is time for peace. It is time to end the conflict and heal the wounds. Fueling the fire, how arms sales prolong suffering. Sending weapons to Ukraine escalates the conflict, making it more intense and widespread. More weapons mean more fighting, leading to prolonged battles and increased casualties. More fighting means more death, with countless lives lost and families torn apart. More death means more suffering. It's a vicious cycle that seems never ending. Some argue that arming Ukraine will force Russia to negotiate, but this is highly debatable. This is a dangerous gamble that could backfire. It is more likely to prolong the war, causing even more destruction and despair. It could even lead to a wider conflict, drawing in other nations and escalating tensions globally. Military aid sends the wrong message, suggesting that violence is the answer. It tells both sides that there is a military solution, which is rarely the case. It makes it harder to find a peaceful resolution as trust erodes and hostility grows. It increases the risk of miscalculation and escalation, leading to unintended consequences. We cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. History has shown us this. We cannot end violence with more violence. It only perpetuates the cycle. We need a different approach, one that prioritizes dialogue and understanding over conflict. The human cost, a crisis of unthinkable proportions. The war in Ukraine is a humanitarian catastrophe. Millions have fled their homes. Thousands of civilians have been killed. Cities have been reduced to rubble. The human cost of this war is immeasurable. Every day, families are torn apart. Children are left orphaned, lives are shattered. The war is also having a devastating impact on the global economy. Food prices are soaring. Energy costs are skyrocketing, supply chains are disrupted. The longer this war continues, the worse the suffering will become. We have a moral obligation to help those in need. We have a responsibility to work for peace. Section 4, Voices of Reason. Experts warn against military escalation. Many experts have warned against the dangers of arming Ukraine, emphasizing the potential for unintended consequences. They argue that it will prolong the conflict and increase the risk of escalation, making the situation even more volatile. The risks of escalation are very real, with the potential for a broader regional conflict. Miscalculation or accident could lead to a wider war, drawing in neighboring countries and global powers. This is a risk we cannot afford to take, as the consequences would be catastrophic. Diplomacy is the only way to end this conflict, through sustained and meaningful dialogue. We must engage in dialogue with all parties, including those with differing viewpoints. We must find a peaceful solution that addresses the legitimate security concerns of all sides, ensuring stability. We cannot afford to remain silent, as silence can be interpreted as complicity. We must speak out against the war, raising our voices for peace and justice. We must demand a ceasefire to halt the violence and begin the healing process. We must work for a just and lasting peace, one that respects the dignity and rights of all people involved. Section 5, Diplomacy, the only path to lasting peace. Diplomacy is the only way to achieve a sustainable peace in Ukraine. We must create space for dialogue. We must encourage negotiations. A ceasefire is the first step. Both sides must agree to lay down their arms. They must commit to a peaceful resolution of the conflict. Negotiations will be difficult, but they are essential. All sides must be willing to compromise. They must be willing to put aside their differences and work together. The international community must support these efforts. We must provide humanitarian assistance to those in need. We must help rebuild Ukraine. Section 6, Act Now. A plea for peace in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is a tragedy for all involved. It is time to end the bloodshed. It is time for peace. The United States must stop sending arms to Ukraine. We must urge both sides to agree to a ceasefire. We must work for a diplomatic solution. Contact your elected officials. Demand an end to the war. Support organizations working for peace. Make your voice heard. The people of Ukraine deserve peace. The world deserves peace. Let us work together to build a more peaceful future.